Welcome to The Explainer. Okay, today we're going to tackle a really big one. We're diving into a text that takes a look at a super common idea, the return of Christ, and kind of flips it on its head. Most of us have heard the story about a secret disappearance, right? But what if the original texts say something completely different? Let's get into it.
All right, section one, a secret disappearance. We're starting here for a reason. This is the version of the story that's everywhere in books, in blockbuster movies, you name it. It's this really powerful, really popular idea. But is it actually what the source material says? That's the big question.
Yeah, exactly. So the text we're looking at, it totally gets this popular belief. It acknowledges that for a lot of people, the idea is that one day, poof, believers are just going to vanish. A secret rapture, leaving everyone else behind to deal with some pretty intense global trouble.
But here's where things get interesting. This is where our source hits the brakes and asks the million-dollar question. What do the original texts actually say? And the argument it lays out is that the descriptions we find in the Bible, well, they point to an event that is the absolute polar opposite of secret. Okay, so check this out. This really lays out the two big ideas side by side. On one hand, you've got the popular idea, a secret event that happens before all the trouble starts. But on the other hand, what this source is claiming is totally different. A massive public return that happens after the trouble. I mean, you can't get two more different timelines than that. All right, moving on to section two, the public return. So if the big claim is that this is going to be some kind of unmissable public spectacle, then you've got to ask, where's the proof? Well, the source points to some really specific and honestly pretty vivid descriptions to back it up. So, first up, the text takes us straight to Matthew 24. And the way it interprets Jesus' own words here is as a direct warning against this whole idea of a secret arrival. The instruction couldn't be clearer, right? If someone comes along and says, hey, he's here, but it's a secret, don't fall for it. And it gets even bigger. The text doesn't describe this like some subtle whisper. No way. It's compared to lightning flashing from one end of the sky to the other. And according to the source, that's not just some fancy poetry. It's a metaphor that means this thing is going to be universal. It's going to be unmissable. Every single person on the planet is going to see it. Then the source pulls from 1 Thessalonians. And wow, just listen to this. We're talking about a shout, the voice of an archangel, the trumpet of God. I mean, come on. Does that sound like a secret mission to you? It's painting a picture of something incredibly loud, super dramatic, and very, very public. Okay, so this brings us to what might be the most crucial part of the whole argument. If this thing is so loud and public, then the question becomes, what about the timing? When is all this supposed to go down? Well, the source points to this verse as the definitive answer. Right there, in the same passage talking about the return being like lightning, the timeline seems to be spelled out. Immediately after the tribulation. For the author we're looking at, there's really no wiggle room there. It's crystal clear. And this really shows you just how strongly the author feels about this. They're basically saying the timeline isn't some big mystery, and that the other idea, the one about it happening before the tribulation, is what they call a doctrine of men. In other words, a man-made idea, not something you find directly in the text. Okay, section 3, a thief in the night. So, I know what you're probably thinking right now. This raises a massive question, doesn't it? What about that super famous phrase, like a thief in the night? Doesn't that just prove the whole thing is supposed to be secret? Well, hold on. According to this interpretation, that whole thief metaphor isn't about secrecy at all. I mean, think about it. What's the main thing about a thief coming to your house? It's not that they're invisible. It's that you weren't expecting them. So the source argues the comparison is all about the shock and surprise for people who aren't ready, not about the event itself being stealthy. Section 4. Spiritually awake or asleep. So once you rethink that thief metaphor, it opens up this whole other idea that's central to the source text, and that's this concept of being spiritually awake versus being spiritually asleep. And the logic here kind of flows right from that. If the event is only a surprise, like a thief, for the folks who are unprepared, well, then it makes sense that for the people who are prepared, it's not a surprise at all. The text calls them the sons of light, and it says they're actually expecting it because they're already, living with their eyes open. And I think this is really interesting, how the source defines these two states. Being spiritually asleep is basically like being in a dream. You know how in a dream all this crazy stuff feels totally real? That's what it's like when you're focused on the temporary things of this world. But being spiritually awake, Well, that's when you see past all that, and the things that are eternal are what actually feel real.
All right, our final section, number 5, the final birth pangs. So, to really tie this whole argument together, the source uses one last, really powerful analogy, and it connects the timing of everything to the purpose of it all. Okay, get this. The text compares that period of sudden trouble to birth pangs. Now, that's a metaphor that completely changes how you look at it, right? Suddenly, it's not just some random, awful disaster. It's a difficult, painful, but ultimately purposeful process, a lot like the labor that comes before a new life. So, with this analogy, the tribulation isn't framed as something believers get to skip out on. Instead, it's the necessary, painful labor that has to happen before the joyful birth, which is the Lord's return. The sequence here is everything. First comes the labor, then comes the birth. You can't have one without the other. And that birth pangs analogy really locks in the source's whole argument. It makes the timing feel not just fixed, but meaningful. The difficult times aren't some accident you're supposed to avoid. They're the unavoidable prelude, the necessary first step before a whole new reality can be born. And that brings us right to the end, to what the source suggests is maybe the most important point of all. It kind of shifts the whole conversation away from just debating timelines and brings it right back to us, right here, right now. It leaves us with this really personal question. No matter what you believe about the when, what does it mean today to be truly awake to the things that matter most? Thanks for digging into this with us on The Explainer.